You ever get that feeling, like you've known someone long before you actually met them? It's not logical, it's not even explainable, but something inside you just knows, not in the head. It's deeper, like your bones or your breath recognize them. That's how it felt when I met her. Not dramatic, not fireworks, just this stillness, like some part of me finally stopped searching. It's taken me years to understand what that really was. Back then, I thought I was just falling in love. And maybe I was. But not in the way people usually mean. This wasn't about butterflies or fantasies or checking every compatibility box. It was quieter, heavier. There was a strange clarity to it, a calm kind of certainty I hadn't felt before, as if my soul was whispering, "Pay attention, this matters." I didn't have the language for it then, but later I'd learned that Jung called it synchronicity, when the outer world starts reflecting your inner world in mysterious, almost poetic ways, when you're no longer sure if something is a coincidence or if the universe is actually speaking to you. And when I think back on how we met, all the small signs leading up to it, the strange timing of it all, I honestly can't say it was random. It felt orchestrated, as if life had been gently nudging us toward each other all along. The crazy part? I almost missed it. I almost talked myself out of even going to that event where we met. I was tired. I didn't feel like being social. But something pulled me out the door. Not motivation, not logic, just this nudge. And when I saw her standing there, not even doing anything special, just existing, that feeling hit me like a wave. You've been waiting for this. You know, we talk so much about trusting our gut or following our intuition, but no one really teaches us how to do it. It's hard to trust something that doesn't speak in words, but that night, my body felt like it knew something I didn't. And for once, I listened. What I didn't realize then is that meant for you doesn't mean easy. I think we romanticize the idea of soul connections, like it's all magic and moonlight. But when someone is truly meant for you, not just to love, but to wake you up, the connection doesn't just comfort you. It confronts you. It holds a mirror to who you are and who you're afraid to become. That night, though, I wasn't thinking that far ahead. I was just soaking in the presence of someone who somehow made me feel more like myself than I ever had alone. And isn't that a strange thing, to feel more you next to someone else? I remember this moment so clearly. We hadn't even talked much yet, but I looked over and saw her laughing with someone, and my chest tightened. Not out of jealousy. It was this overwhelming realization that I was watching a moment that would change my life. And it terrified me. Not because I didn't want it, but because something inside me already knew I wouldn't be the same after this. That's the thing about certain people. They don't just enter your life, they rearrange it. Not forcefully, not all at once, but slowly, quietly, like a song you didn't know you loved until it got stuck in your head and started meaning something. For days after, I couldn't stop thinking about her. Not in a desperate way, but more like a hum in the background of my life. I went through my routines, but something had shifted. I felt more awake, like some part of me had been dormant, waiting for this signal, and I started noticing things, memories, dreams, emotions, bubbling up that I hadn't touched in years. I didn't know it then, but this was the start of something bigger than romance. This was the beginning of a return to myself, to the parts I'd buried, ignored, or tried to outgrow. When Jung said that the unconscious guides our most meaningful choices, I think this is what he meant. On the surface, it might have looked like a casual meeting, a nice conversation, maybe even a coincidence, but underneath, something ancient had stirred, something my conscious mind couldn't have planned. And it wasn't just about her. It was about what she activated in me, this deep, almost primal knowing that I was standing at the edge of something that could unravel and remake me. That night, walking home, the city felt different, quieter, brighter, like everything had tilted just slightly. I didn't know what would come next. I didn't know if we'd meet again, but I knew something had begun. And in that knowing, that quiet, undeniable pulse of recognition, I felt more alive than I had in years. There's something strange that happens when you meet someone who stirs your soul. Not just your heart, but the parts of you you've hidden even from yourself. At first, it feels beautiful, magical even. But then, if you're really paying attention, it starts to feel unsettling. That was the part I wasn't ready for. We got close, fast. There was a comfort between us that felt ancient, like we were just picking up where we'd left off lifetimes ago. But then, out of nowhere, I started reacting in ways I couldn't understand. I'd pull back without knowing why. I'd get irritated by things that didn't matter, and sometimes I'd feel this overwhelming urge to run, not because of her, but because of what I was seeing in me. It's like she had a key to doors inside me I didn't even know existed. And when those doors swung open, they weren't filled with light. They were full of dust and shadows. No one talks about that part of connection, that it will surface your unfinished business, that the person who feels meant for you might also be the person who unknowingly drags your hidden wounds into the open. And that's exactly what happened. She didn't even try. It wasn't about anything she said or did. It was how I felt around her, unguarded, exposed, seen, and that kind of visibility, when you're not used to it, feels like standing naked in a storm. I started questioning everything, not just about the relationship, but about myself. Why did I react so strongly to certain things? Why did I feel scared when things felt too good? Why was I suddenly remembering parts of my past I thought I'd buried? I remember one night we had a small disagreement, nothing big, just a misunderstanding, but it hit me like a tidal wave. I felt like a little kid again, desperate to be understood, terrified of being left. And it wasn't about her at all. It was about me, about some part of me I hadn't healed, still begging for love the way I used to when I was young, and unsure if I deserved it. That night I cried, not because of the fight, but because of what it revealed. I realized I had been living with a story I didn't even know I was carrying, that love always had to hurt a little, that if someone really saw me, they'd walk away. She didn't walk away, but I almost did, because when someone reflects your shadow, it's tempting to blame them for it, to say, "This is too intense," or "You're making me feel things I don't want to feel." But the truth was, she wasn't doing anything to me. She was just holding up a mirror. And what I saw in it was me. That's the terrifying beauty of a real connection. It doesn't let you hide. It forces you to confront the stories, the scars, the self-protections you've carefully constructed. And in that confrontation, you have a choice. Run or stay, close or open, repeat or transform. For a while, I struggled. I kept wondering, why is this so hard if it's meant to be? But then I started understanding something Jung once said, that our shadows aren't evil or wrong. They're just the parts of us we've abandoned. And when someone enters your life and invites those parts back in, it can feel like chaos. But maybe that chaos is sacred. Because what if love isn't just about peace and harmony? What if it's also about disruption, the kind that shakes you awake? What if the person who's meant for you isn't the one who soothes all your fears, but the one who makes you face them? She did that for me, and it wasn't always graceful. I resisted, I got defensive, I questioned her, questioned us. But deep down, something kept telling me, this discomfort is growth. This pain is a signal, not a warning. Something inside me was being undone, not to be destroyed, but to be rebuilt on truth instead of fear. The truth is, she didn't save me. She didn't fix me. But she did offer me something far more powerful. The chance to see myself clearly. Maybe for the first time. And that kind of seeing, it changes everything. It's easy to say we want to grow, to heal, to become more whole. But when the moment arrives, when someone hands you the mirror and doesn't look away, it's one of the scariest gifts you'll ever receive. But if you can sit with it, if you can resist the urge to run or numb or blame, that's where the transformation begins. The more time we spent together, the more I noticed something that, at first, I didn't have words for. Around her, I didn't feel like I had to try. I didn't have to charm or impress or prove anything. I could just be. And somehow, that was enough. You know how rare that is? To feel like you're not performing, like you're not adjusting yourself to fit into someone's idea of who you should be. With her, I could breathe. I could sit in silence and not feel the need to fill it. I could say something awkward and not spiral into shame. I could show my insecurities, not just the polished, acceptable ones. And she didn't flinch. She stayed. It was in that space that I started to feel something unfamiliar. Freedom. Not the kind that makes you want to run away, but the kind that makes you want to come home, to yourself. I didn't realize how much of my life I'd spent bending to expectations, bending to roles, bending to versions of myself I thought were more likable, more manageable. But around her, that scaffolding started to fall away, and in its place, something softer began to emerge, something real. This was the beginning of my individuation, though I didn't know the term back then. Jung talked about it as the process of becoming who you truly are, of shedding the personas we wear to survive, and connecting with our core self beneath all the layers. It sounds beautiful, and it is, but it's also disorienting. Because when you start removing the masks, especially ones you've worn for years, there's a moment where you don't quite know who you are underneath. You've spent so long being for others that standing there as just yourself feels naked and vulnerable and wildly powerful. She never asked me to change. That's the wild part. It wasn't like she gave me some long speech about authenticity. She just was, unapologetically herself, and that gave me permission to consider, maybe I could be too. And I started noticing how often I edited myself in other areas of my life, at work, with friends, even alone. I started catching myself mid-thought, mid-behavior, realizing I was still trying to fit, still trying to earn belonging. And suddenly, that way of living felt exhausting. There's a moment I'll never forget. We were sitting in her apartment, just talking about nothing, really. I said something vulnerable without even thinking, something I would have usually filtered. And she just looked at me and smiled. Not pity, not judgment, just presence. And I remember thinking, oh, this is what it's like to be safe. Not the safety of avoidance, not the safety of hiding, but the safety of being seen and still held. And that's when I realized something that rocked me. I had been starving for that kind of space my whole life, not just in relationships, but with myself. I had been trying so hard to be good, to be easy to love, that I'd lost touch with who I was beneath all the effort. She didn't fix that. She didn't need to. She just loved me in a way that helped me see where I was still abandoning myself. That's the quiet power of real connection. It doesn't scream, it doesn't demand, it just invites, gently, persistently, and if you're willing, it brings you home. The process wasn't linear. There were moments where I'd fall back into old patterns, try to shrink or edit or retreat. But each time I became a little more aware, a little more honest, a little more willing to stay present. And the more I showed up as myself, the more I started to trust that I could, that I didn't have to earn my place, that I was enough just as I was. It was terrifying at first, but then it became intoxicating. Freedom, I've learned, isn't loud. It's quiet. It's the stillness in your chest when you no longer feel the need to prove. It's the softness that returns to your body when you realize you're no longer at war with yourself. I used to think love was about merging, about becoming one, but now I think it's about returning to your own wholeness in the presence of another. And when someone truly sees you and doesn't ask you to be anything else, that's sacred. That's what she gave me. Not answers, not salvation, just space. Space to become, space to unbecome, space to remember. And in that space, I started to find myself. It's funny how we think growth is supposed to feel good. We imagine it like a sunrise, golden, warm, full of hope. But real growth? It's gritty, it's confusing, it's full of contradictions and sharp edges, and sometimes it looks like distance, doubt, and discomfort, especially in love. For a while, things between us were beautiful, quietly beautiful, but eventually life did what life always does. It brought friction, and I don't mean drama or chaos. I mean those little misalignments, the misunderstandings that sting more than they should. The moments when love feels unfamiliar. I started questioning everything again, not because something was wrong, but because something was changing inside me, inside her, between us. At first, I panicked. I thought, wait, if this is meant to be, why does it feel like we're out of sync? But then I remembered something I'd read. Conflict doesn't mean the end of connection. Sometimes it's the beginning of depth. Jung once said that our outer struggles are often reflections of inner ones, and when two people are truly close, when they're mirrors for each other, it's inevitable that the cracks will show. Not just theirs, yours too. That was the hardest part. It wasn't just that she saw my shadow, I started seeing hers. And it would have been easy to turn away, to label her flaws, to build walls, to say, this isn't what I signed up for. But somewhere deep in me, I knew. This was the work. This was the invitation, not to fix her, not to fix myself, but to stay present through the mess. There was a night I remember so clearly. We were sitting across from each other, both a little raw from an argument that neither of us really knew how to finish. The air felt thick with unsaid things. And then she looked at me, eyes tired but honest, and said, I don't always know how to love you right, but I want to learn. And something in me cracked open, because haven't we all felt that way? Haven't we all stood there wanting to love well but not knowing how, bumping into our own limitations, our fears, our histories? In that moment I realized love isn't about getting it right. It's about showing up even when you're afraid you'll get it wrong. We're taught to think love is effortless when it's real, but I've learned it's not the absence of difficulty that makes a relationship meaningful. It's the willingness to move through difficulty together. There were days I wanted to shut down, to numb out, to go back to being alone where it felt simpler. But something about this, about us, kept me leaning in. Because every conflict was also a clue. Every disagreement revealed something deeper, an old wound, a hidden fear, a place that still needed tending. And instead of running from those things, we started talking about them. Not always gracefully, but honestly. I told her about my fear of abandonment, how I sometimes shut down not because I didn't care, but because I cared too much. She told me about the part of her that had always felt too much, too emotional, too needy, and how she was afraid I'd one day confirm that. These weren't romantic conversations, they were real ones, messy, vulnerable, raw. But through them, we started to understand each other and ourselves in ways we never could have if everything had stayed perfect. That's the thing no one tells you. The struggle is the path. The cracks are where the light gets in, yes, but they're also where trust is built. Not the kind that says, "You'll never hurt me," but the kind that says, "Even when we hurt, I'll stay curious. I won't abandon this." And it changed me. It taught me that conflict doesn't mean failure. It means you're being called to grow. That discomfort isn't a warning sign. It's a doorway. And that love, real love, doesn't avoid tension. It transforms it. There's so much talk about finding the one. But maybe the real question is, are you willing to become the one who can hold love when it gets hard? She was, and slowly I learned to be, too. Not perfectly, but honestly. And that, I think, is what makes a relationship sacred. Not the absence of struggle, but the shared courage to meet it with open hearts. The longer we stayed together, the more I realized how much she reflected things back to me. Not just the parts I loved about myself, but the ones I avoided. Being with her was like standing in front of a mirror I couldn't turn away from. And some days I hated what I saw, not because she made me feel small. Quite the opposite, actually. She saw my potential so clearly, sometimes more than I could. And that's what made it hard. Because when someone believes in the version of you you're still afraid to become, you start to feel all the ways you're not there yet. There were moments I'd catch myself acting out patterns I thought I'd outgrown, getting defensive, going quiet, making myself busy to avoid intimacy. It wasn't her, it was the parts of me that still hadn't healed. And the closer we got, the louder those parts became. But she didn't shame me. She didn't demand perfection. She just stayed. Not in a passive way, but in a way that said, "I'm here if you're willing to do the work." And I was, even though I didn't always know how. We'd have these conversations late at night, the kind that peel back layers you didn't even realize you were wearing. I'd tell her about my past, the relationships where I'd felt invisible, the moments when I chose silence over truth, safety over self. And she'd listen, not with pity, but with presence. Then she'd share her stories, the heartbreaks that taught her how to build walls, the people who asked her to shrink, to be less emotional, to stop being too much. And I'd see her not just as this strong, intuitive woman, but as someone who had learned to protect her own light after years of being told it was too bright. It was in those moments that I understood the depth of what we were building. We weren't just sharing joy, we were sharing wounds, and not in a codependent save-each-other kind of way, but in a conscious, I see you and I'm still here kind of way. And that's what began to shift everything for me. Because healing doesn't happen in isolation. It happens in connection, when someone sees the parts of you you're ashamed of and doesn't look away. When they remind you, through their presence alone, that you're not too broken to be loved. Jung wrote that what we deny in ourselves, we project onto others. And I saw that happening over and over. The things that annoyed me most in her were often the things I hadn't accepted in me. Her emotional intensity, it scared me because I'd buried mine. Her desire to talk things through, it frustrated me because I still struggled to name my own feelings. But the more I recognized this, the less I resisted, the more compassion I found, first for her, then for myself. I remember one evening in particular. We'd had a rough few days, tension, miscommunication, distance. I was tired, she was tired, and we just sat. No fixing, no talking, just sat side by side on the floor, leaning into each other's quiet. And in that silence, something softened. I realized we didn't have to solve everything. We just had to be willing to stay. That night became a turning point. It taught me that love isn't about constant clarity. It's about the willingness to hold space when things are unclear, to trust that even in the fog, we can still walk forward, together. And that trust, it started rewiring something in me. Slowly, I began to internalize what she had been reflecting all along, that I didn't have to hide, that my depth wasn't a burden, That being fully myself, messy, tender, growing, wasn't just allowed, it was safe. And in giving myself that permission, something inside me began to heal. The fear of not being enough started to fade. The belief that love required sacrifice started to crumble. And in its place, a new truth grew. Real love doesn't require you to be perfect. It asks you to be present. To me, that's the quiet miracle of these kinds of relationships. They don't promise to fix you. They invite you to meet yourself, fully, honestly, courageously. And in that meeting, healing begins. By the time we reached what most people would call stability, something unexpected happened. The intensity calmed, yes, but underneath it, there was something deeper, something steadier, a kind of quiet knowing. We'd been through enough to see each other clearly. The illusions had fallen away, not just the ones we had about each other, but the ones we carried about love itself. And in their place was something more real, more grounded. I used to think love meant ease. Now I think it means clarity, not the absence of difficulty, but the presence of truth. I remember this afternoon. Nothing dramatic. We were grocery shopping, laughing over which pasta sauce to get, and I looked at her standing there, holding a jar of something too expensive, and I thought, this is it. Not the romance, not the grand gestures, but the safety, the simplicity, the fact that I could be fully human here and still feel chosen. That's when I knew this wasn't about fate anymore. It wasn't about signs or symbols or synchronicities. It was about choice. Every day we were choosing each other, through the mess, through the fear, through the ongoing process of becoming. Jung once wrote that individuation, the journey toward wholeness, isn't about reaching perfection. It's about integration. And that's what love had become for me, the place where all my parts were allowed to sit at the table, even the ones I'd once hidden, even the ones that still scared me. And the more I allowed those parts to exist, in myself and in her, the more I felt a kind of peace I'd never known. Not the peace of everything going right, but the peace of not needing to pretend anymore. She'd see me flinch at an old trigger, and instead of asking why I wasn't over it yet, she'd reach out and hold my hand. I'd notice her withdrawing into herself on hard days, and instead of taking it personally, I'd sit beside her and wait. We weren't trying to fix each other anymore. We were learning to hold each other. And that changed everything. It's easy to think love is about finding the perfect match. But I think love is about learning the perfect rhythm. How to move with someone through their highs and lows. How to keep dancing even when the music shifts. And the thing is, you don't learn that rhythm by avoiding pain. You learn it by being in it, by stumbling, misstepping, apologizing, and adjusting together. I used to be afraid of conflict. Now I see it as conversation. I used to see flaws as threats. Now I see them as doors. I used to crave the spark. Now I treasure the warmth. Because over time, love taught me something profound. You can't have intimacy without honesty. And honesty isn't always soft. Sometimes it's awkward, sometimes it stings, but it always clears a path back to connection, back to trust, back to yourself. That's what she gave me, over and over, a path back, to my body when I wanted to numb, to my truth when I wanted to perform, to my heart when I wanted to shut down. And I tried to offer the same to her, not perfectly, but sincerely. Because that's what love becomes when it's no longer about need or fantasy or fear. It becomes devotion, not to the illusion of a person, but to their essence, to their becoming. And in walking that path beside her, I discovered something else too, a deeper devotion to myself. Not the version I thought I had to be, but the one who was always underneath it all. The soft one, the scared one. The strong one, the one who had finally come home. It didn't happen all at once. And it wasn't some dramatic transformation. It was slow. It was daily. It was built on quiet decisions, to speak gently when I wanted to snap, to stay present when I wanted to flee, to trust love even when it felt unfamiliar. And that's what love really is, I think. A daily revolution. Not of fireworks, but of faith. Not in an outcome, but in each other. Not in perfection, but in presence. And somehow, in all of that, I became more myself than I ever imagined I could be. I didn't expect it to feel like this, the end of the storm. Not because everything became easy, but because something inside me had settled. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was searching. I wasn't reaching, grasping, trying to fix or force or figure it all out. I was just here. And that here was enough. I remember waking up one morning, light streaming through the blinds, her hair tangled on the pillow beside me. The quiet was thick, like the world had paused, and I thought, this is what peace feels like. Not absence of struggle, but the presence of alignment. With her, yes, but more than anything, with myself. It's wild to say that. For so long I thought the goal was to find someone who would complete me. But what I found instead was someone who helped me meet myself. And that changed everything. She wasn't a savior. She wasn't some idealized partner I had imagined in my more naive moments. She was real, flawed and brilliant and brave. And loving her, truly loving her, meant loving her humanity and allowing her to love mine. That was the final lesson. Integration. All the work, all the reflection, all the inner peeling back, it had led me here, to the realization that we don't need someone to fix us. We need someone who reflects back what's already whole. And that's what she did, not with grand declarations or perfect timing, but with presence, with her patience, with the way she stayed when I was unraveling, with the way she never tried to be anything other than herself. And in doing so, she gave me the courage to do the same. There's this idea we cling to, that once we heal, we'll finally be ready for love. But I don't think healing is some checkpoint we reach. It's a process. Ongoing, messy, circular, and the people we choose to walk with don't wait for us to be perfect. They just ask us to be real, and the deeper we went, the more real it became. We weren't afraid of each other's darkness anymore. We had seen the worst, the fear, the silence, the defensiveness, and we stayed. We had also seen the best, the laughter, the honesty, the late-night tears that tasted like truth, and all of it was allowed. Nothing needed to be hidden anymore, and when I look back, I don't remember the milestones, the anniversaries or the holidays or the pictures we posted. I remember the in-between moments, the tiny acts of softness, the mornings we sat in silence, coffee in hand, watching the world wake up. The nights we talked until sleep took us mid-sentence, the way her hand found mine under the table when something in me needed grounding. That's what love becomes, I think. Not an event, but a rhythm. And in that rhythm, something beautiful happens. Transformation without pressure, growth without shame, intimacy without performance. It's not about becoming a new person. It's about becoming yourself, fully, with someone who makes that journey safer, not scarier. And maybe that's the real purpose of a destined connection. Not to rescue you, not to complete you, but to reveal you, to bring you closer to your essence, to remind you of the parts of you that never needed to be hidden. It's strange. I used to think this story was about finding her. Now I see. It was about finding me. And she just happened to be the one who handed me the mirror. And I wonder how many of us are still out there, walking through life, carrying pieces of ourselves we've never fully seen. I wonder how many are still searching for that one person to finally make them feel whole. And I wish I could sit with them, like I'm sitting with you now, and say, the work begins inside. But when someone appears and helps you see yourself clearly, when they love you not despite your wounds, but through them, that's not an accident. That's the moment your life begins again, not as someone different, but as someone more true, and that's what she gave me. Not just love, but truth. Not just partnership, but freedom. Not just another person, but a portal to everything I'd been searching for in myself all along. You'd think that by now, with all the growth, the understanding, the deep sense of self that came through this connection, things would feel easier. In some ways they did, but in others, the work only deepened, because that's the thing no one tells you. Becoming more yourself doesn't mean the end of struggle. It means the end of avoidance. And without the armor, everything feels a little closer to the bone. I found myself revisiting old relationships in my mind, not out of longing, but with a new kind of clarity. I could finally see the ways I had twisted myself to be loved, the ways I had traded authenticity for acceptance. I wasn't angry at those versions of me, just sad for them, and quietly proud that I wasn't that person anymore. And yet, even in this new space, I wasn't immune to fear. There were days I woke up with a lump in my throat, not from anything she had done, but from the echo of old stories. What if this is too good? What if I mess it up? What if I lose myself again and don't even notice until it's too late? Those thoughts didn't control me like they used to, but they still whispered. They still tried to tug me back into smallness, into safety, into solitude. But the difference now was this. I didn't believe them, at least not fully, because every time that fear rose, something else rose with it, the memory of how far I'd come. The evidence of every conversation I stayed in, every boundary I honored, every truth I spoke, even when my voice shook, I had changed. Not in some dramatic movie montage way, but in the quiet, steady way that only time and presence and real love can create. And she had changed too. We were no longer just lovers. We were witnesses to each other's becoming. We held space not just for who we were, but for who we were still growing into. And that kind of witnessing, it's sacred, it's rare. One night I asked her if she thought we were soulmates. She paused, thought for a moment, and said, "I think we're mirrors, and I think we chose each other for a reason." It struck me, because I think I used to believe soulmates were supposed to make everything feel effortless. But mirrors? Mirrors show you everything. The light, the shadow, the parts you celebrate and the ones you're still ashamed of. And if you're willing to keep looking, to not flinch, to not turn away, they become the most powerful teachers. She was that for me, and I tried to be that for her, not perfectly, but with honesty. I stopped trying to be her solution and started being her space. I stopped trying to have all the answers and started asking better questions. I stopped trying to protect her from her pain and started walking with her through it, hand in hand, even when the path was unclear. And that's what love became, not a place to hide from life, but a place to meet it, together. I used to crave certainty, the kind that says, this is it, forever, guaranteed. But what I value now is presence, the kind that says, I'm here today with all of me, and I choose you again and again in the light and the dark. That choice is the foundation we built on, and every time we made it, through tears, through laughter, through silence, through intimacy, we grew stronger. Not in a way that made us invincible, but in a way that made us real. So if you've ever wondered what it feels like when someone is truly meant to be part of your journey, it's not always fireworks. It's not always clarity. Sometimes it's a slow unfolding, a quiet remembering, a steady coming home, not just to them, but to yourself. And when that happens, when you finally meet the person who doesn't just walk with you, but walks you back to you, you will know. Not because it's perfect, but because it's true.